Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you actually happened to a woman named Jasmine. And by the end of this story, you're going to feel something in your chest you weren't ready for. She spent 11 years serving a family that never once said, "Thank you." And on the one night she thought she'd finally be seen, her own birthday, in the middle of a ballroom full of silk dresses and champagne glasses, she was humiliated in front of everyone she'd ever worked for. But here's the thing nobody in that room understood yet. That night wasn't the end of Jasmine's story. It was the beginning. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we get into this one, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? What country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one of them. Tonight's story is about dignity, about the quiet strength it takes to survive humiliation, and about a woman who was underestimated by everyone around her, until the truth came out in a way nobody expected. I promise you this one is going to stay with you. So stay close. It's about to get unbelievable. It started like every other day for Jasmine Carter. She was 34 years old, and for the last 11 years, she had worked as a live-in housekeeper for the Whitfield family, one of the wealthiest households in a quiet, manicured Connecticut town called Brookhaven. Jasmine had come to America from Georgia, the small coastal town, not the country, with nothing but a suitcase and a promise she'd made to her dying mother. "Work hard, baby. Keep your head high. God sees everything, even when people don't." She'd carried those words like armor for over a decade. The Whitfield estate sat behind iron gates, a stone mansion with white columns and a driveway lined with rose bushes Jasmine herself had planted years ago. Mrs. Whitfield, a soft-spoken widow, had hired Jasmine when her son Ethan was only 19, a wide-eyed college kid who used to sneak into the kitchen at midnight to steal cookies Jasmine baked. Back then he called her Miss J, and hugged her every morning before school. But people change. Or maybe Jasmine thought they just stopped pretending. Ethan Whitfield was now 29, engaged to a woman named Victoria Grant, the daughter of a hotel magnate, raised in penthouses and private jets, a woman who had never once made her own bed. Victoria didn't see Jasmine as a person. She saw her as furniture, a means to an end. Someone who existed to keep her world spotless and invisible. For years, Jasmine endured it quietly. She ironed Victoria's designer gowns without complaint. She stayed up past midnight preparing 5-course dinners for parties she wasn't allowed to attend. She swallowed insults disguised as jokes. "Jasmine, sweetie, you're basically part of the furniture at this point." And she smiled, because smiling was easier than losing the only steady income that let her send money home to her younger sister, still in nursing school. But there was one person in that house who saw her. Truly saw her. Old Mrs. Whitfield. Before she passed away 8 months earlier, she had pulled Jasmine aside in the garden, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "You've given this family more love than they deserved, Jasmine. One day the truth about you, about who you really are, is going to come out. And when it does, I hope I'm there to see people's faces." Jasmine hadn't understood what she meant. Not then. After Mrs. Whitfield's death, everything shifted. Ethan, grieving and distracted, let Victoria take control of the household. And Victoria wasted no time reshaping the estate, and Jasmine's daily existence, into something crueler. It was Victoria's idea to throw Jasmine's 35th birthday party. At first, Jasmine thought it was kindness. Rare gesture. Victoria had insisted, practically begged, that Jasmine let them celebrate her. "You deserve a real party, Jasmine. Something nice. Something you'll never forget." Jasmine should have known better. She should have listened to the small, cold feeling curling in her stomach the moment Victoria smiled, that particular smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. Because on the night of that party, standing in a ballroom glowing with pink and purple lights, beneath a neon sign that spelled out her own name in glittering cursive, "Happy birthday, Jasmine," Jasmine was about to learn exactly what Victoria Grant meant by unforgettable. And nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. The night of the party, Jasmine stood at the edge of the ballroom in her plain pink work dress, the only formalish thing she owned, feeling like a stranger in her own celebration. The room had been transformed. Purple silk draped from the ceiling. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors. A three-tier cake, frosted in delicate pink and adorned with sugar roses, sat on a table near the center of the room. Her name written across the top in golden script. Happy birthday, Jasmine. Dozens of Ethan and Victoria's friends filled the space. Men in tailored tuxedos, women in sequined gowns, all holding champagne flutes, murmuring polite confusion about who exactly this party was for. Wait, Jasmine overheard one woman whisper. Isn't that the housekeeper? Jasmine's chest tightened, but she kept her chin up. Keep your head high, her mother's voice echoed. God sees everything. Ethan approached her first. His eyes soft with something like guilt. Miss J, happy birthday. I mean it. For a moment, Jasmine let herself believe this could be genuine. That maybe, after everything, someone in this family still remembered the woman who raised roses in their garden and remembered every guest's dietary restriction and every anniversary. Then Victoria arrived, radiant in a deep purple gown. Her hair swept into an elegant updo, diamonds catching the light at her throat. She raised her champagne glass, and the room quieted. Everyone, Victoria announced, voice smooth as silk. Tonight we're celebrating someone very special. Someone who has served this family faithfully for over a decade. A ripple of polite applause. Jasmine, Victoria continued, turning toward her with a smile that made Jasmine's skin crawl. Come here, sweetheart. Blow out your candles. Jasmine stepped forward, hands trembling slightly, toward the beautiful cake that, for one fragile moment, actually felt like it was hers. She leaned down. She closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, of her sister back home, of 11 years of quiet dignity. She blew out the candles. The room clapped. And then Victoria's hand shot out. Fast, sudden, violent, grabbing a fistful of Jasmine's hair. Oh, one more thing, Victoria said, her voice dropping into something venomous. I forgot to mention, this cake isn't really for you, Jasmine. It's for reminding everyone in this room exactly what you are. Before Jasmine could react, Victoria shoved her face down into the soft pink frosting. Hard, humiliating, cruel, smearing cake and crushed sugar roses across her cheek, her hair, her dignity, in front of 100 watching guests. Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a glass. A woman covered her mouth in horror. That's what you get, Victoria hissed, low enough for only Jasmine to hear, for thinking you belonged in this family. Jasmine stayed frozen, bent over the ruined cake, frosting dripping from her chin, her heart hammering, her vision blurred, not with tears but with something sharper, something that felt strangely like clarity. Because in that horrifying silent moment, surrounded by shocked faces and Victoria's cold, satisfied smirk, Jasmine remembered something. Something Mrs. Whitfield had told her in the garden, 8 months before she died. And it was about to change everything. The room had gone completely silent. Jasmine slowly straightened, frosting sliding down her collarbone, her dark eyes locking onto Victoria's. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply reached up, wiped a smear of frosting from her cheek with 2 fingers, and looked at it like it was the most interesting thing she'd seen all night. Feel better? Jasmine asked quietly. Victoria blinked, thrown off by the calm in Jasmine's voice. Excuse me. I asked if you feel better, Jasmine repeated, steady, unshaken. Because in about 30 seconds you're not going to. Ethan stepped forward, horrified. Victoria, what the hell was that? Jasmine, I am so sorry, I didn't know she was going to. It's fine, Ethan, Jasmine said, and something in her tone made the whole room lean in. Actually, this is perfect timing. There's something I've been waiting to tell you. Your mother asked me to wait until the right moment. I think this is it. Victoria let out a sharp, mocking laugh. What, are you going to fire yourself? Please go ahead and pack your... 8 months ago, Jasmine continued, cutting through Victoria's voice like it wasn't even there. Your mother sat me down in the garden. She told me she'd rewritten her will. The room went dead silent. Ethan's face went pale. What are you talking about? Jasmine reached into the small clutch she'd been holding all night, a clutch Victoria had mocked earlier for being off-brand, and pulled out a folded envelope, worn soft at the edges from being carried for months. Your mother left me a letter, Jasmine said, and a copy of an amended trust document. She said I could open it whenever I felt it was time. I think. Jasmine glanced down at the ruined cake, then back up at Victoria's stunned face. I think tonight qualifies. That's not possible, Victoria snapped, though her voice had lost its earlier ice. Eleanor Whitfield would never. She would, Ethan interrupted quietly, staring at the envelope like it might bite him. She loved Jasmine like family. More than. He stopped himself, but everyone in the room heard the unspoken end of that sentence. More than she loved you, Victoria. Jasmine opened the envelope with steady hands and began to read, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned ballroom. To my son Ethan, and to whoever may be present when this is finally read, Jasmine Carter has been more of a daughter to me than blood ever managed to be. She raised my roses. She held my hand through chemotherapy when my own family was too busy to visit. In recognition of 11 years of loyalty, love, and quiet grace under a roof that too often failed to see her worth, I leave to Jasmine Carter a 20% ownership stake in the Whitfield Hospitality Group, effective upon my passing, along with a deed to the guest cottage on the eastern property line, to be hers free and clear forever. The ballroom erupted into stunned murmurs. Victoria's face had drained of all color. That's a joke. That's forged. It's notarized, Jasmine said calmly, holding up the second page. Filed with Whitfield family trust attorneys back in December. Your fiancé's mother made sure of that specifically because she suspected something like tonight might happen eventually. Ethan turned to Victoria, his expression shifting from shock into something colder, harder. You just assaulted a 20% shareholder of my family's company. In front of our entire social circle. On camera. He gestured toward the corner, where several guests still held up phones, recording every second. Victoria's mouth opened, but for the first time all night, for the first time perhaps in her entire life, no cruel words came out. The days following the party moved fast. Faster than Jasmine could have imagined. The video of Victoria smashing Jasmine's face into the cake had already begun circulating before Jasmine even made it back to the guest cottage that night. Someone had posted it online with a caption, "Rich fiancé humiliates housekeeper at her own birthday party. Then this happens." By morning it had over 2 million views. The internet, it turned out, did not take kindly to cruelty caught on camera. News outlets picked up the story within 48 hours. Not because a housekeeper had been humiliated. Sadly, stories like that rarely make headlines, but because of the twist that followed. A wealthy fiancé assaulting a woman who, unbeknownst to her, held a legal, notarized ownership stake in the very company that funded the extravagant lifestyle Victoria had built her identity around. Ethan Whitfield called off the engagement 3 days later. He didn't do it quietly. He did it publicly, in a statement that read in part, "My mother spent her final months making sure the people who truly deserved recognition in this family finally received it. I only wish I'd opened my eyes to what my fiancé truly was before it cost someone I care about their dignity in front of hundreds of people." Jasmine, for her part, didn't gloat. She didn't do interviews at first. She simply moved into the guest cottage, a small ivy-covered house on the eastern edge of the property, with a wraparound porch and a view of the very rose garden she'd tended for over a decade. But something inside her had shifted permanently. For 11 years she had made herself small, quiet, agreeable. Not because it was her nature. Jasmine had always been strong, sharp-witted, full of dreams she'd folded up and tucked away to survive, but because survival had required it. Now, for the first time in a long time, she let herself dream out loud. She sat on the porch of her new cottage with a legal pad, sketching out plans she'd carried in her heart since she was a teenager back in Georgia. Plans for a non-profit that would train and place domestic workers in dignified, protected employment. Plans for scholarships for children of housekeepers and caretakers who never got the chance their parents sacrificed everything for. She thought of her mother's words again. Work hard, baby. Keep your head high. God sees everything even when people don't. Her mother had been right. Someone had been watching all along. An old woman in a garden, quietly rewriting history for a person the world had overlooked. But Jasmine also understood something her mother never got the chance to teach her, because her mother passed before Jasmine's own story reached this chapter. Sometimes the reward for surviving cruelty isn't revenge. It's the chance to build something better than the people who hurt you ever could. Victoria Grant did not disappear quietly. In the weeks following the broken engagement, she tried everything to salvage her reputation. She gave a tearful interview claiming the video had been taken out of context. She hired a publicist. She insisted Jasmine had provoked her, though she could never quite explain how blowing out birthday candles constituted provocation. None of it worked. Brands she'd previously partnered with for social media promotions quietly dropped her. Friends who once filled her group chats stopped responding. Her father, embarrassed by the public spectacle attached to the family name, reportedly cut her monthly allowance in half and demanded she figure her life out on her own for the first time in 28 years. Jasmine watched all of this unfold from a careful distance. She felt no satisfaction in Victoria's unraveling, surprising even herself. What she felt instead was something quieter. Something like relief that the truth, eventually, tends to find its way into the light. Meanwhile, her own life was transforming in ways she could barely process. Ethan, still reeling from the collapse of his engagement and the loss of his mother, began spending more time at the estate, and more time talking with Jasmine, not as an employer to an employee, but as two people who had loved the same woman and were now navigating a world without her. "I keep thinking about all the years you were here," he admitted one evening, sitting across from her on the cottage porch as the sun dipped behind the tree line. "And how little I actually saw you. You made my lunch every day for 4 years of high school. You know that." Jasmine smiled faintly. "Peanut butter, no crusts, cut diagonally. Every day for 4 years." Ethan laughed, surprised. "I forgot about the diagonal thing." "I didn't," Jasmine said. "That's the difference between the people who serve and the people who are served, Ethan. We remember everything. We have to. It's how we survive rooms that don't want to remember us back." Ethan went quiet for a long moment, absorbing that. "I want to help," he finally said. "With whatever you're building. The non-profit. The scholarships. Whatever you need, funding, connections, my name if it helps open doors. I owe you that much." "I owe you a lot more than that, honestly." Jasmine studied him carefully, searching for the performance, the angle, the catch she'd learned to expect from wealthy people over 11 years of service. She didn't find one. "All right," she said slowly. "But this isn't charity, Ethan. This is a partnership. Equal footing. If you're in as an equal, not as someone doing me a favor." Ethan nodded, extending his hand. "Equal footing," he agreed. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Jasmine shook a Whitfield's hand not as an employee, but as an equal. 6 months passed. The non-profit Jasmine founded. She named it Rosewood Rising, after the roses she'd tended for 11 years, roses that had somehow bloomed even in seasons of neglect, had grown faster than she ever imagined possible. With Ethan's initial funding and the 20% stake in Whitfield Hospitality Group generating real income, Jasmine established a training and placement program for domestic workers across 3 states, ensuring fair contracts, healthcare benefits, and legal protections that had never existed for people like her when she'd first arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase and a promise. She also launched the Eleanor Whitfield Memorial Scholarship, named after the woman who'd seen her when no one else had bothered to look, a fund providing full college scholarships to children of domestic workers and caregivers. The first recipient of that scholarship was a 17-year-old girl named Destiny, whose mother had cleaned hotel rooms for 14 years to support her. When Jasmine handed Destiny the acceptance letter at a small ceremony in the very ballroom where Jasmine had once been humiliated, now repurposed as Rosewood Rising's community event space, Destiny burst into tears. "My mom always said hard work doesn't always get noticed," Destiny said through tears, clutching the letter. "But she said it still matters. She said someone always sees it, eventually." Jasmine felt her own eyes burn as she hugged the girl. "Your mom is right," she whispered. "Someone always sees it. Sometimes it just takes longer than we'd like." Word of Jasmine's story, the full story, not just the viral cake video, began spreading. Journalists wanted to understand how a woman humiliated on camera had transformed that moment into a movement helping thousands of workers just like her. She was invited to speak at conferences on labor rights. A local news station did a feature titled, "From Housekeeper to Changemaker: The Woman Who Turned Humiliation into Hope." Jasmine, uncomfortable with the spotlight but understanding its power to help others, accepted select opportunities, always redirecting attention back to the mission, back to the workers whose stories rarely made headlines at all. But amid the growth, the interviews, the scholarships and grand openings, Jasmine still returned each evening to the same small cottage porch, still watched the same sunset over the rose garden, still felt the same quiet ache when she thought of her mother, who never got to see this chapter unfold. "Keep your head high," her mother's voice still whispered sometimes in the quiet moments. "God sees everything even when people don't." Jasmine finally understood what that meant, all these years later. It didn't mean the world would always be fair. It meant that dignity, patience, and quiet strength were never wasted, even when it felt, in the moment, like they were being trampled into pink frosting in front of 100 strangers. Not everyone was celebrating Jasmine's rise. Victoria Grant, now living in a modest apartment far removed from her former penthouse lifestyle, watched Jasmine's story unfold across every news outlet with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The woman she'd once dismissed as basically furniture had become a nationally recognized advocate, praised in interviews Victoria used to dream of giving herself. One evening, unable to contain her bitterness any longer, Victoria drove to the Whitfield estate uninvited. She found Jasmine in the rose garden, kneeling in the soil, tending to the same roses she'd cared for since she first arrived 11 years ago. "Look at you," Victoria said coldly, arms crossed, standing at the garden's edge. "Playing gardener and philanthropist. Must be nice, stealing someone else's family fortune and calling it justice." Jasmine didn't stand immediately. She finished planting the seedling in her hands, brushed the dirt from her palms, and then rose slowly, meeting Victoria's furious gaze without flinching. "I didn't steal anything, Victoria," Jasmine said evenly. "Eleanor Whitfield gave me what I earned through 11 years of loyalty and care." "What did you earn exactly in the 2 years you were engaged to her son?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything." "Don't I?" Jasmine's voice sharpened slightly, though she kept her composure. "I lost my mother while working 60-hour weeks for a family that barely acknowledged my existence outside of what I could do for them. I lost years of my own life raising other people's children while my own sister grew up mostly without me, because I was sending every spare dollar home so she could finish nursing school. I know exactly what it feels like to lose things, Victoria. The difference is, I never had the luxury of losing gracefully in a mansion. I had to lose quietly in silence, while still showing up to work the next morning." Victoria said nothing, her earlier fury faltering slightly under the weight of Jasmine's words. "You humiliated me in front of a room full of people," Jasmine continued, Because you needed someone smaller than you to feel powerful. I understand that now. Hurt people, Victoria. But I'm not interested in hurting you back. I don't need to. You did that to yourself the moment you decided cruelty was easier than kindness. For a long moment, Victoria simply stood there, something unreadable crossing her face. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the first flicker of self-awareness she'd allowed herself in months. I don't expect an apology, Jasmine added quietly, turning back to her roses. But I hope someday you find whatever it is you were actually looking for that night. Because it wasn't dignity. And it definitely wasn't in that cake. Victoria left without another word. She never returned to the Whitfield estate again. A year after the party, Jasmine stood backstage at a national conference on labor rights, waiting to deliver the keynote address to a room of nearly 1,000 people. Advocates, workers, lawmakers, journalists. Her sister, Danielle, now a licensed nurse thanks to the years Jasmine had sacrificed to support her education, sat in the front row, tears already welling in her eyes before Jasmine even said a word. Ethan sat beside Danielle along with several Rosewood Rising board members. A team Jasmine had built from the ground up, made up largely of former domestic workers, caregivers, and advocates who understood firsthand what it meant to be overlooked. When Jasmine finally stepped onto the stage, the applause lasted nearly a full minute before she could speak. A little over a year ago, Jasmine began, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. I was humiliated in front of 100 people at what was supposed to be my own birthday celebration. My face was pushed into a cake by someone who believed my worth began and ended with what I could do for her family. The room fell silent, hanging on every word. For 11 years before that night, I made myself small, Jasmine continued. Not because I lacked ambition or intelligence or dreams, but because survival, for people like me, often requires shrinking yourself until you're small enough not to threaten the people who hold power over your paycheck, your housing, your ability to feed your family. She paused, scanning the crowd. Faces that understood, faces that had lived versions of her story. But here's what that night taught me, even in its cruelty. Dignity isn't something anyone can take from you, no matter how hard they try. They can humiliate your body. They can mock your circumstances. But they cannot touch the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth, unless you let them. Applause rippled through the room. Rosewood Rising exists, Jasmine continued, because I believe every domestic worker, every caregiver, every person who has ever been treated as invisible while holding up someone else's entire household, deserves protection, dignity, and the chance to build something of their own. Not charity, not pity, opportunity. By the end of her speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, including Jasmine's own. As she stepped off the stage into her sister's tearful embrace, Jasmine allowed herself, for the first time in over a year, to simply feel proud. Not vindicated. Not victorious over Victoria. Just proud of the woman she'd become, and the countless women she was now helping become the same. 2 years after that fateful birthday party, Jasmine stood once again in the same Whitfield ballroom, except this time, the room had been completely transformed. Gone were the purple silks and neon signs of Victoria's design. In their place stood simple, warm string lights, wooden tables lined with handwritten place cards, and a modest but beautifully decorated cake, this one for the 2nd annual Rosewood Rising Scholarship Gala. Destiny, the scholarship's first recipient, now a sophomore in college studying social work, stood at the podium introducing this year's class of 30 new scholarship recipients, a number that had grown from a single girl with tear-filled eyes 2 years earlier. Jasmine watched from a table near the front, Danielle on one side, Ethan on the other, her heart swelling with something she still struggled to fully name. I used to think this room only held bad memories for me, Jasmine admitted quietly to Ethan as the ceremony continued around them. Ethan glanced at her thoughtfully. And now? Jasmine considered the question, watching Destiny hand a scholarship letter to a nervous, hopeful 16-year-old boy whose mother, a hotel housekeeper, much like Jasmine once was, wept openly in the front row. Now I think this room finally means what it was always supposed to mean, Jasmine said softly. That people who work hard, who show up every day without recognition, who sacrifice pieces of their own lives for people who barely notice, they deserve a moment where the room finally sees them. Truly sees them. Ethan smiled, raising his glass slightly toward her. To being seen. Jasmine raised hers in return, the warmth of the gesture settling somewhere deep in her chest. To being seen, she echoed. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and guests slowly filtered out into the cool autumn night, Jasmine stepped outside onto the same marble steps where she'd once stood frozen, humiliated, frosting dripping from her chin. She looked up at the stars, thinking of her mother. Keep your head high, baby. God sees everything even when people don't. I did, Mama, Jasmine whispered into the night air. I kept my head high. And look what grew from it. 3 years after the party that changed everything, Jasmine Carter stood in the rose garden she'd once tended as an employee, now legally hers, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. Colors, she realized with a small smile, not unlike the frosting that had once been smeared across her face in humiliation. Rosewood Rising had grown into a nationally recognized non-profit, operating in 12 states, having placed over 4,000 domestic workers into dignified, protected employment, and funded over 200 scholarships for their children. Victoria Grant, last Jasmine had heard, had quietly moved out of state, working an entry-level marketing job far removed from the wealth and cruelty that once defined her. Jasmine felt no anger when she thought of her anymore, only a distant, almost sad understanding. Cruelty, she'd come to learn, was so often just pain wearing an expensive dress. Ethan remained a steady friend and business partner, though their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected. A partnership built on mutual respect, occasionally punctuated by quiet dinners on the cottage porch, watching sunsets in comfortable silence. Danielle now worked as a nurse practitioner in the same hospital where their mother had once been treated in her final months. A full-circle moment that still brought Jasmine to tears whenever she thought about it too long. And Jasmine herself had become something she never imagined possible on that humiliating night 3 years ago. Not just a survivor of cruelty, but proof, living, breathing proof, that dignity, patience, and quiet strength are never truly wasted, even when the world tries its hardest to convince you otherwise. Here's the truth this story wants to leave you with tonight. You never know which moment of humiliation, heartbreak, or quiet suffering is secretly the seed of something extraordinary. Sometimes the cruelty we survive becomes the very soil from which our greatest purpose grows. Jasmine didn't choose that painful night at her own birthday party, but she chose, every single day afterward, what she would build from its ashes. If this story moved you even a little, do something small for me. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe if you're new here because we tell stories just like this one every single week. And if you know someone who's ever felt overlooked, unseen, or underestimated, share this with them tonight. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to be reminded. Keep your head high. Someone always sees it, eventually.